Welcome to the video, guys. I purposely ignored this story for the last couple of days because I wanted the hype to die down surrounding it so the BBC can think they've got away with it. This is the problem with news as it happens. On the day it's all the rage and all everyone could ever talk about, but within a few days it's completely forgotten about, and these companies, or in this case the BBC, just brush it off and carry on as normal, which, let me tell you, cannot be allowed to happen. Of course, I am talking about the CountryFile episode that aired on Sunday. This complete and utter joke of a show was not based in any amount of fact. It was literally just the BBC trying to further the agenda that we have been dealing with for a month now. The issue we have here is that the BBC think they can actually pull this sort of stunt and get away with it. As we all know, the BBC is funded by us, and this is not something we want to fund. The government needs to take away the licence fee ASAP just based on this nonsense here, not forgetting what has obviously gone on before in relation to the Bias Broadcasting Corporation. Now obviously, when this nonsensical episode came out, Twitter erupted against the BBC, where their tweet got absolutely ratioed, something like 5,000 or 6,000 comments down to a couple of hundred likes. Well, eventually, some of the newspapers picked up on this and run a couple of articles on it, which we will take a brief look at. Now, before we go through them, remember I am on the Parler app now. It is the free speech version of Twitter. If you haven't already, come and join me over there. Now, back to CountryFile and the BBC's never-ending ploy to make the people of this country hate them. Well, the Mail Online ran an article yesterday headlining CountryFile sparks race row after claiming people from BAME backgrounds feel unwelcome in the countryside because it is a white environment. Which is absolute nonsense. They were actually trying to say that the countryside and the people who live there are racist. CountryFile has sparked a race row after claiming people from BAME backgrounds feel unwelcome in the countryside because it is a white environment. I do feel I have to say it's not really CountryFile that have done this, it is the BBC and of course the editors themselves. They make these decisions, the rest of them are just puppets doing what they are told. They may have some input on it, but at the end of the day, the higher-ups make the decisions. Which is why, as you will hear from this article, we literally need to defund the BBC. The BBC programme broadcast an episode last night in which TV presenter Dwayne Fields investigated the issue, based on independent research from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, also known as DEFRA. Now to me, there should be a fairly big red flag in that just there. Based on independent research from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Now, did the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs do this research themselves, or did they get somebody else to do it after being pressured by some left-wing group? This, you have to remember, is the treasonous Maybot DEFRA, not the actual Boris Johnson government we find ourselves in now. This is a report that came out last year. Now obviously, if it's an independent group, we don't know how independent they are, and let's take a look at some of the groups that are actually investigating certain things. These people are hardly impartial, let's be honest. Some of them are the most well-known race baiters you could imagine. The government report released last year said some people from BAME communities alongside white people felt the UK's national parks are a white environment. So, because people felt this, likely not knowing what they're talking about, the BBC is going to spout this shit like it is fact, and the countryside is racist along with the people who live there. Which I'm sure incenses every one of you listening to this that does not live in a city or large town. In the segment, Mr. Fields walks through Epping Forest in Essex and says, when I talk to people from the black and minority ethnic community, it's clear they don't view the UK countryside as somewhere that's for them. It's not theirs, they don't belong there, and I want to find out why. Now, there's two problems I actually have with what is being said here. First, he goes on about walking through the countryside when he's in fucking Epping Forest, which let me tell you is inside the M25, so hardly the countryside by any stretch of the imagination. Just because it's got some trees there does not make it the countryside at the end of the day. Saying to me that this geezer really doesn't have a clue what the countryside is. The border between Essex and London, last time I checked, is certainly not the countryside. I can't say I've been there in the last 10 years, but it certainly wasn't then. I doubt it's changed now. And also, I have to say, asking a few people in a city what they think who have likely never experienced it, nothing to do with racism, just simply because they don't want to, can't be bothered, or can't do it for whatever reason, does not prove that this is true, as these arseholes are trying to make out. We already know about the review last year, I've already gone over that. They found that the countryside is seen by both black, Asian, minority ethnic groups and white people alike as being very much a white environment. Well, last I checked, the country is majority white. What did you really expect? Though it's not the white environment that the BBC and this arsehole are trying to push. They are trying to push as if the area is hostile towards black ethnic minority groups when that is not the case. You have to remember that some places in the countryside are very popular tourist destinations for people who come from all over the world. So I really don't know what they're talking about there. You could take the Peak or Lake Districts for instance as places where people come from all over the world to visit, completely shitting all over their narrative. As with these studies and polls, my question is, who have they asked? What sort of group did they go to? And as I said earlier, they said it was an independent report, which kind of tells me it was done by a third party for DEFRA, not by DEFRA itself. So who knows what bias is there from the group who actually did it. The review also concluded that if that is true today, then the divide is only going to widen as society changes. No, I don't think that is true at all. He continued, our countryside will end up being irrelevant to the country that actually exists. I'm not sure what country you think is going to exist, but let me tell you, the people of this country won't let it change too much. There might be silence now, but that could soon change if this shit continues, especially from the likes of the BBC. He is a Scout ambassador and works for the National Trust. Both organisations are working to get more diversity into the outdoors. Good for them. Surely you should just let people do what they want to do, but if you want to try and force people into it so you can look virtuous, that's entirely up to them. I couldn't give a shit about either of the organisations, to be honest. BBC CountryFile tweeted, while Dwayne Fields found solace in the landscape of the UK and beyond, many in black, Asian and minority ethnic groups see the countryside as being a white environment, which is obviously the tweet that stirred up a shitstorm for the BBC, and I like to hope that plenty of people are putting complaints about this episode. The post triggered debate amongst Twitter users, with one commenting, oh, BBC, why oh why? I don't usually bother, but this is ridiculous. Britain is historically populated by white people. What on earth is stopping anyone, regardless of their skin colour, enjoying nature? No one is stopping anyone. Utter cobblers, and I would have to agree with that 100%. Well said, that is the actual truth of the situation, not the bullshit the BBC are trying to push. Lawrence Fox, as everyone knows from his recent Question Time appearances and the shit that he's done before if you watched any of it, defund this rubbish. Nature isn't racist, get a grip. Hashtag defund the BBC. That hashtag there needs to trend every day if you ask me. He continued here as well, the BBC is a corrupt organisation that sows division between friends. If they want to compete for our appreciation, they should do so within the free market. I would 100% agree with that as well. Why ain't the government doing something about it? I thought they were going to actually come for the BBC. He posted, having lived in the countryside for 10 years, I'm fairly confident nature doesn't give a fuck what colour you are, which obviously it doesn't. Defund this rubbish, nature isn't racist, get a grip as we heard. Anyone saying that the countryside is open to everyone is absolutely right. The piece looked at a DEFRA report that highlighted some of the barriers that people from the BAME community felt was preventing them from enjoying the countryside. They felt this. Doesn't make it true. End of story, as I've already said. And here, of course, we have the usual white guilt merchants. The countryside may be passive, but a lot of people living around in it are not. Well, if you start pumping out this crap and tweets like that, you might well certainly change a few minds to go the way you're talking, which, let me tell you, for the most part, is certainly not the way people are in this country. And here we have race baiting puppet number 2. Missed this week's show, but we'll be sure to catch up on iPlayer. The response on Twitter shows why this is such a huge issue. Thanks for highlighting nothing apart from people's feelings, obviously. Adventurer Mr. Fields later addressed the debate, explaining anyone saying the countryside is open to everyone is absolutely right. The piece looked at a DEFRA report that highlighted some of the barriers that people from the BAME community felt was preventing them from enjoying the countryside. Well, that is certainly not the way you framed it in your piece, along with the guests that you had on. A BBC spokesperson told Mail Online CountryFile based a segment on an independent DEFRA report published last September, and we felt it was important to examine such issues now more than ever, particularly in light of recent events that didn't even fucking happen here, you complete and utter mugs. These recent events did not happen in this country, and if the figures are actually looked at, there would be no excuse for any of what's happened over the last month, which I feel is soon going to change, given what's happened recently on Twitter. Now, the absolute bullshit that was the BBC's piece really needs to be remembered and called out as much as possible, which is why I delayed making this video, so a couple of days later it can be talked about again, and I will continue bringing it up anytime I talk about the BBC, that is for sure. As always, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who supports the channel, and my other social media links are down in the video description if you want to come and support me on Twitter, BitChute, and a variety of other platforms, including my second YouTube channel. As I said, all links are down in the video description.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors, slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires, and that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going, and we are glad to be going. We're off.